Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Hi. All right, we've got about a minute to go before we get started here. So while we're waiting, I'm going to take a second here to get us set up on YouTube because we'll also be streaming live to YouTube today. Super exciting. But while we're doing that, I'm going to put a message into the chat here for the Zoom chat. Please feel free as we're waiting to let us know where you're joining us from. I am always very interested and intrigued to find out how wide our audience is, especially for different chats and where they pull from different parts of the world. It's really kind of interesting to me. So please feel free to share that information with us. And you're also, as always, welcome to turn on your cameras if you'd like. I know that I very much appreciate seeing new faces, so you're more than welcome to do that. All right, I will, it's 3 o'clock right now. I'm gonna hit record and we will get started.
Something like this help?
Okay, welcome everybody. Happy Wednesday. My name is Meg. I'm part of the team here at Power to Fly, and I'm going to be your host this afternoon. I'm super excited to dig into today's topic with Julia and get answers to all of the questions you all had submitted in advance. Before we do that, I'm going to run through really quickly our housekeeping slide. If you've joined us for a chat previously, this will all be repetitive, so I apologize. Today is all about you. It's all about our community members. So to that end, participation is key. You've all written in great questions on the front end, in advance of today's session, but just so you are all aware, you're more than welcome to turn on cameras, come off mute to ask questions if you'd like. You're also welcome to put questions into the Zoom chat. And if you'd like your question raised, but you want it to be raised anonymously, please feel free to just pick my name from the dropdown. Instead of sending the question to everyone, it'll send it directly to me, and I will make sure the question is raised and your name is kept out of it. As we are coming off mute to ask questions or give comments or anything, the one thing I do recommend is if you're not actively speaking, put yourself on mute. It's just a good way to avoid audio contamination. I'll be doing it because I've got 2 bulldogs snoring like 3 feet from my desk, so that way no one gets interrupted audio-wise that way. And then we also try not to talk over each other, but I know with a lag and things, this can be difficult. So we just kind of do our best, hope for the best. This is being recorded today, so whether you're able to join us for the whole hour or you can only stay for the first 15 minutes, everybody gets an email after the fact, probably sometime later tomorrow, with a rewatch link that'll take you straight to the recording on our website. You can send it to anybody you want. You can share it whenever you want. It's always free to watch. You can watch it as many times as you want. So you don't have to worry about taking, furious notes while we're having this chat. You can always come back and revisit everything that was said today and on all of our chat and learns. So let's see. The last thing I do have to say is about the questions for today. So we collected all the questions that everybody submitted in advance of today's chat. We've rearranged them into what is hopefully going to be a conversational flow, but I love being interrupted and I want to make sure that your questions get answered. So please feel free to cut me off at any time and raise a question that you have. Again, you can always put them in the chat whenever, anytime during today's conversation, and I'll keep throwing in reminders to that into the Zoom chat. So before we talk more about today's subject, I want to introduce you to our speaker today. So Julia is joining us from the Guru Technologies team. She runs GTM enablement with them, empowering revenue teams to deliver exceptional customer experiences. Prior to Guru, Julia led product marketing communication and enablement for the Adobe Advertising Cloud. In Julia's education and career, she has been inspired by the passionate. She is affected by diversity in perspective and believes that nuance and gray area can make all the difference. She's an effective communicator since birth, is tenacious, thoughtful, a leader, a team member, and a listener. So welcome, Julia, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's always embarrassing when someone's reading about you and you're watching, so I appreciate that introduction and appreciate everyone that has joined today. I really, as Meg said, I am here to help, so definitely interrupt And I want to add value for you. And I think that's what Power to Fly is all about doing as well. So,
Well,
yeah.
thank you for that. So one last call out before we get to our questions here. You can follow Guru Technologies on Power to Fly. I'm going to throw the link into the chat right now. And if you go to that link, what you can do is you can click follow. Like you can see it up there on the screen. It's in the upper right-hand corner. That will add you to something called the Follow Network for Guru. So this is something that I recommend for people that are looking at companies that have a specific interest in a company, and maybe if you don't see anything currently listed, any positions that would really suit you, I always recommend that you follow the company. It is a really good way to let the hiring managers from Guru, as like our talent advocates here at Power to Fly, is a really good way to let them know that you are interested in working with Guru. Because what happens when there's new roles that get posted, that follow network is the first place that the hiring managers from Guru and the talent advocates from Power to Fly look to see if there's anybody who is already interested in Guru that might be a good fit for whatever role they're trying to fill. So that is a really good way to kind of make sure that you stand out in a sea of other people that are applying for jobs with Guru. It's also a really good way to stay updated on events like today. So you would find out if we were hosting an event with Guru. You also get a job alert when the company posts new roles. And Julia and I were syncing earlier on this call, and we were discussing some of the new roles that Guru has opened. So we'll discuss those later in the call. But if you follow the link that I'm going to drop in the chat, then you can check out Guru and look at their open roles, like what they've got posted with Power to Fly right now. So last thing before we get started, I'm going to rest on this slide and then the next one for a couple extra seconds. If you want to take a screenshot of this slide, that will give you a roadmap of the questions that we have pulled and the order in which we're going to tackle them, because we've combined, put all these questions together from what you had asked previously. I'm going to switch to the next slide. If you want to grab a screenshot, awesome. If you don't want to, it's not the end of the world. It's just an easy way for you to have some visibility on what we're going to be covering. We might not get to all these questions depending on how the conversation goes. So if that's the case, and you have a question that you definitely want asked, please be sure to bring it up. You can throw it in the chat, you can come off mute and ask, you can, comment on another question, whatever you'd like, but just so you're aware, this is what's probably going to be covered. So without further ado, let's get started with our first question. So Julia, what was your job before you took time off? And have you added any skills during that time off in terms of your profession, either what you were doing or what you are doing?
Yeah, so as you shared in my bio, for 7.5 years, I worked in Adobe's advertising cloud as a product marketer, comms manager, sales enablement, human. So did a lot of different jobs there. That is an enormous and wonderful company. So it's consistently on, I think for the past 19 years, the best 100 companies to work for. And so leaving that job is kind of confusing to a lot of people, I would say. So yeah, in that job, I worked overseas in London for a bit. And I worked primarily with our sales teams and product teams, educating folks on what we were doing in the market. If you think about advertising and digital advertising, the purpose of it is to get people to buy more stuff online. And that to me was a misalignment that I really didn't totally understand the repercussions of until I left that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that for me, like, really wasn't the right thing. And so in my time off, I would say the most important skills, and they weren't necessarily like professional skill, is that I had many, many, many conversations with myself and really truly tried to practice responding versus reacting. And I'll talk more about that, but like, that's probably my number one like skill, and a lifelong skill at that. And then I actually went to the New York State Writers Institute because I like writing. I wanted to try out what it would be to maybe get go into a more advanced writing program. And so the skill of being able to discern that, whoa, this thing that I'm trying is not for me, was probably the second most helpful thing. But I wasn't, I wasn't working on, my coding or practicing French or doing something that really was like a prereq for any position.
Okay. And I know we addressed this question later, but later I want to talk to you a little bit about like kind of that push and pull of using your time off wisely versus feeling like you need to be overproductive, that kind of thing. So we'll touch on that a little bit later in case anybody has similar questions along that same vein. All right, so this person says, I made a similar decision to leave a good job and take indefinite time off. How did you stay true to your North Star, even at times of extreme uncertainty or economic difficulties?
Yeah, this is probably not that you can have favorite questions, but this one really hit home for me. And like I mentioned, I had like a lot of conversations with myself. And I think for me, as much as it was thinking about what I wanted in the future, it was tactically sitting down with something that doesn't cost very much, pen and paper, and writing and thinking through like what I wanted to sort of leave behind to help me get to a place where I could focus on what the North Star was. So one of my mentors gave me this suggestion when I started looking for work, which was really make some space, make quiet time for yourself. And that's really, 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 really hard. And I recognize that, and I struggle with that. And I'll definitely talk more about that too. But what are your essential questions? Like, what are the things when you start talking that your voice changes and your face changes? And like, what are the things that make you light up? And that will guide you or guided me in kind of figuring out where I wanted to be. So instead of making a list of like, I need all these things, I want all these things, making space to focus on what brings you joy and coming to kind of like essential questions, and then going out into the world and asking your network and asking your trusted A team. A friend of mine talks about having her A team, asking them to help you answer those questions. The making time for the self conversation, I actually did sort of a technology detox. And so when taking time off, I would highly recommend really, really resting. And that like comes from a place of privilege if you really can like truly rest. And what I mean by that doesn't mean like taking a bubble bath. It means like letting your mind rest and giving yourself the ability to reset with a pen and paper is a very helpful thing. Instead of going to the next thing, and we can kind of talk about the cult of productivity, the cult of busyness, which is a very alarming thing tied to capitalism, which is important, but what's your relationship with it? So yeah, staying true to my North Star, having a conversation with myself, seeking diverse perspectives. So we all know that we go to a certain friend when we want a certain type of advice, and maybe expanding that group of people, and looking at and talking to people who maybe don't live where you live or have the sort of role that you have, because I spent some time hanging out with some freegans, and freegans are people who they identify as freegans who are like looking through supermarket bins for their food. So like that's pretty diverse perspective for me.
Yeah, I'm right with you there. And I think you're hitting on a very important note here, because there's one of the questions that just got asked in the chat is like, what do you do if you don't have mentors or an A team? I think it's totally fine to not have that core group of people that you know you're going to call, right? Because I feel like that's kind of a trope of a lot of like TV or media and stuff that we see is people saying like, oh, well, I have my group, I have my tribe. Not everybody feels like that. They don't always feel like they have their established like people they can count on, whatever. But I think that's also calls into, sharp relief the importance of, like you said, asking a diverse group of people for perspectives. I'm always a little wary about asking for advice from people or giving advice, honestly, because I tend to think of it from the mindset of if you're taking advice from this person, you're basically saying, I would like to switch places with you, or I think that you're doing okay in the choices you're making. And that can be a hard thing to realize, is that maybe you're taking advice from people who you wouldn't really want them in the driver's seat of your choices. So it doesn't mean that you can't ask for advice from those people, but like like Julia said, ask a group of people that are going to give you diverse answers because they have diverse backgrounds or diverse perspectives, either on you or your professional life or whatever, that would help you maybe come to a more grounded consensus, or a consensus that you can live with, or help you, figure out what you're looking for advice-wise.
Totally. And taking, I don't know who gave me this phrase, but like, it's, having conversation with yourself, but seeking your own counsel. So if you survey the internet, you survey, if you don't have an A team, you're looking at articles, you're attending webinars, and knowing that anyone's only sharing from their very particular experience, and then coming back to your own counsel, was something that I probably every day, especially when I'm like, it was really hard, a lot of it. And I'm like, well, okay, what am I doing? I showed up in my parents' house after 10 years of not living there with a suitcase, 2 suitcases, no job, no apartment, no partner, and be like, oh, here, it can be really, really isolating, and depending on who you ask for advice as well. So yeah, seeking your own counsel. That's a big thing.
That's a good way to think of it too, because I feel like a lot of times when people go and do the like research or ask around, like you said, like you turn to certain people to get certain answers, and I feel like it's important to seek out those answers that don't agree with what you maybe thought, and kind of evaluate those. But the answers that if you can kind of pay attention to the kind of answers you're looking for, that can also help guide you as to maybe what you actually really want to do, as opposed to what you think you should do.
Right.
Personally, like if I outright reject somebody's advice and I take a look at why, is it because it's completely in conflict with what I want to be told? Or is it just because it'd be different and be a huge stretch for me? You have to kind of evaluate these things.
Totally. And I do find that it was easier to evaluate the input of it's your mom, it's your friend. I had one friend say, oh, okay, so like, when are you going to get a job? Right? There's just like these little nagging voices that it's not really about me. It's about whatever was going on with her. But having done the quiet time work of pen and paper, working through sort of ideal job situation, ideal life situation, like by myself, it helps you clarify what voices you want to hear and take action on or not.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving on to our next question. How do you fight the inner voice that tells us to always be productive, even in your time off? So we talk about rest, but then we also talk about like what you can do with that time. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, meditation. I'm kidding, but also I'm not, right? Even this weekend, we had, a lot of us had a long weekend. Wake up in the morning with a long list of stuff that I feel like I need to do. And something that is helpful for me was to like examine, and I continue to do this. It's something that I like have a self conversation around, which is why are we attached? Why am I attached to productivity? And like, think about that. Is it like an anxiety because I always need to be doing something or making something or showing that I am working hard? That was a big question for me. And then there's all this sort of New York Times published something, there's some Harvard studies about like this cult of busyness and how it's actually a status symbol to be like, I'm so busy. And I, through thinking about it and kind of journaling and writing it down, I struggle with it, but I like rejected that. I will, my colleagues will hear me say, it's like, I never want to say that I'm too busy. My old boss once told me that busy is the new stupid. So I don't know if that's true or not, but like, why is that something that we're so attached to? And that helps me. It is a struggle, but that helps me struggle. That helps me think about it. The other piece of advice that I would give, there's a woman, Catherine Price. She's a researcher, and she wrote a couple articles in the New York Times, but she wrote a book called How to Break Up with Your Phone in 30 Days. This is not an option. This is not an easy option, but there is sort of this performative productivity, among other things, that goes on the socials, as I call them, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and like taking a break from those and examining, maybe not always taking a break. I'm back on. I have a love-hate relationship with Instagram. I delete it every couple weeks and then reinstall it, whatever. But you're getting all this input that is performative rather than seeking your own counsel.
Yeah, there's actually a good point made in the chat here, that people judge you for not being busy. But if you have the time and the luxury of being able to step back and really investigate, like, well, why am I busy? Is it because I'm not managing my time well? Is it because I need the distraction and I don't like not being busy because then I think about other things that, am I being busy or am I actually being productive? And then take a look at productivity and realize what it is you're producing. Is it something that's helping you, or is it something that's hurting you? Like I can, so I do social media for Power to Fly, and what usually suffers is my own social media presence. And I used to think like, oh, well, I'm spending all this time on Instagram and Facebook and blah, blah, but I don't ever post anything on my own anymore because I'm too tired, blah, blah. Well, like, why does that bother me? No one's like, waiting with bated breath for status updates on how my dinner was last night. It's fine. I don't need to be posting all the time and creating a social media presence because it's not something that really matters to me. But maybe there are people out there that it does matter to. And so that would be something like, are you being productive or not productive? Might, the answer to that question might be more important than asking, than investigating the question itself.
Yeah. And it's definitely different for every individual. And certainly was for me. And it feels good to me to be busy too. And yeah, to guest number 12, people do judge you for not being busy because everyone's just busy judging themselves.
Yes, very true. All right, so stepping into our next question, this person wanted to know, what are the best ways to keep yourself motivated, knowing that you still have lots of unknown in what could be your next job or employer? A lot of people motivate themselves with like a deadline or an endpoint. And if you have a lot of unknowns, like you don't know when you're going to get a job, you don't know what you want to do, that can be scary. So how do you keep yourself motivated during times like this?
Yeah, it was really like difficult and also helpful for me to kind of battle with that exact uncertainty. And like, especially now, we as our species does not like uncertainty at all. It's why people like sign up to be in certain jobs. It's why people like routine. And so I really struggle with that. Again, back to like the conversation with myself piece, I have, a piece of paper that, in the beginning of the week, I call it a brain dump. This is from David Allen's, early 2000s, Getting Things Done. And I don't know how well that is aged, but that's a David Allen Getting Things Done, a framework for basically like how to not be up at night thinking that, oh gosh, I didn't call grandma and I didn't send this email. And so he suggests this brain dump, and I'll do it I'll do it at the beginning of the week now and then, which is, what are all the things in my head that I need to get out of my head? And it's everything, again, from I gotta call the insurance company to fight with them on this one bill, to I have to send a Slack message. I use Slack at work to XYZ person. And then the next step is instead of it just being a list where you check stuff off, you can really prioritize, okay, what are the top 5 things I need to do today? And then like, what's been helpful for me throughout my whole career is like, what is the next step on each of those things? Because I can often be overwhelmed by, okay, if I need to call the insurance company about this bill, is the next step logging in and I forgot my password to the insurance portal? Is that the next step? Because there are like taking it one little tiny micro step at a time is immensely helpful, or was for me, because then I'm not spiraling into, oh my gosh, I need to find an apartment and a job and I need to follow up and my grandma's mad at me. Just really, really breaking down everything into a next action will help you decide kind of like what matters and hopefully keep you motivated.
I think the brain dump thing is a really great idea. I do something similar. I have a notepad next to my bed. And if I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm unable to sleep or unable to fall back asleep, that's one of the things I can usually count on to do. I'll pull out the notepad. I've got like a real, dim light next to my bed so that way I don't wake up my husband or the dogs. And I will write out whatever it is I'm thinking of in that moment, whether it's, reminders or like you said, like some personal, some professional, some whatever, but write it all out. And that way I can kind of go to bed and not worry, oh, I'm not going to remember this in the morning. I'm not going to remember I wanted to check such and such. But I think it could be helpful to do it more, on a more frequent basis.
Yeah, I find that very helpful. And then like the other thing I would say, it's like, we're not necessarily motivated by our to-do list, or at least I'm not, right? We're motivated by what brings us joy, having already taken stock of those things and like had that conversation with ourselves. So if in your brain dump, in your weekly brain dump or your daily brain dump, if you have those sort of North Stars as the guiding motivators, that I find that is like, okay, wait, I can prioritize what matters, and these 3 things don't, because remember when I came up with this list of amazing present tense goals that I've set for myself. So that's helpful for me. And then on the sort of like time, I think there's a time management aspect here too. And there's a ton of resources, especially in COVID life, floating around like how to gauge when you're like do your best work. And so don't pigeonhole yourself or force yourself to be doing everything all in one day. So if you're a morning person, this is kind of obvious advice, but if you're a morning person, like tap into that and do 1 or 2 things from your brain dump next steps list that align to your North Star.
I think another thing that can be helpful, especially if we're thinking in terms of like once you figure out what you want to do and you start applying for jobs, setting up reminders in your calendar for like to circle back and check back or reach back out again to this for this job or to this person who interviewed you or whatever. It's one of those things that like if the job doesn't pan out and so then you have reminders that are a little bit superfluous, you at least get that kind of, granted it's a false sense of completion, but you could at least be able to take those things off your list later on. But for me, it's a really good way to kind of short circuit forgetting or losing track of something, is to say, okay, I'm going to schedule out on my calendar a reminder to at 10:30 3 weeks from now follow up on this email.
I like that. Yeah.
All right, so this next person's question is talking a little bit more about that time off, and they want to know how you maintain your skills during time off, because it is depending on your amount of privilege or luxury that you have. Time off could easily balloon into a lot more time than you anticipated. So what's the best way to kind of proactively maintain your skills in whatever industry you have while you're doing this?
Yeah. Well, I can't pretend to be an expert on this, certainly, but as I mentioned, I really like gave myself a space, and this was again a privilege, but space to be like, okay, I'm not going to work on certain skills. But then the, I tried new things. Again, I'm not coding or learning French, but I tried to do some bartering, actually. So I have a friend who started a wellness coaching program, and I worked with her on her branding and messaging. And in turn, she gave me wellness coaching. I know that's not always an option for everyone, but just so that I'm using the sort of, the marketing and writing muscles and sort of those thought muscles, I worked with her on that. But as I said earlier, I think like my greatest skill that I bring to my job was really like getting in touch with myself and how I respond or react to situations, because that, like, without that fundamental self-knowledge of how I want to show up, I don't think I would have been able to have the job that I have now, or, have these self conversations.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I don't know if that really satisfies that.
I mean, I think that this is one of those questions that's so open-ended that it really, there's so many different ways to answer it depending on what your industry is or what you're planning on doing with this time off. Because a lot of the other questions talk about pivoting and changing, and instead of just making it a sabbatical. But if go right ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. What I will also say, and I have a comedian friend of mine named Annie Bernstein. She's very funny. I got well, part of the reason I left my job is because I started, after a bad injury, taking a yoga certification. And that sort of, those learnings and what I learned from that preempted me or prompted me to just quit my job because I wasn't aligned to it anymore. And so Annie Bernstein, my friend, said that my yoga teacher certification was like the bat mitzvah of quitting your corporate job. And so I just tried a skill that I don't practice at all now, but that is kind of a diverse skill that I can bring, and I show up with it in different ways that have nothing to do with me teaching yoga, but trying to take care of my community.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good call out in this, especially along the lines of like, we usually tell people if you have a break in your resume, yeah, you want to use it to like learn some skills or something. But one of the things we also try and stress to people that I feel like they forget a lot is that those soft skills are just as important as a certification or, something with like a fancy certificate that you can throw on your LinkedIn and say, hey, I know how to do this skill now. Those soft skills are things that you develop just by being a person in the world, and how you spin those soft skills and how you can apply those soft skills to either your current industry, whatever industry you're trying to pivot to, whatever. There's a myriad of ways to go about doing that. And it's one of those things that you can use, like we talked about, like, yes, be productive, but make it something that's not just valuable to your career. It's something that's valuable to you as a person and how you're developing, as an adult. Yeah, absolutely.
That's very well said, right? It's like that's what I have to say, like, some of this stuff is like very dark and spiritual, but like I came out on the other side of it, and because of all the uncertainty, I came out more grounded and having more tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And plus, like, it's always important to remember that maintaining your skills, if you want to go more technical with it, there's volunteer groups where you can like join a hackathon if you have like, those very specific technical skills. There's ways that you can maintain your skills during your time off that don't require you to, pick up a side hustle or a second job or something. There's ways to do it that are a little bit smaller, but as long as you are really kind of not necessarily diligently, but as long as you're somewhat tracking that, you can say like, oh yeah, and I spent this much time working with this organization and I developed these skills in, in the interim or because of that role or whatever.
Totally.
All right, so this person has questions about that pivot that we talked about. So how can you career pivot during a sabbatical period? What ways can you not only gain new skills, but show proficiency in them to recruiters?
Um, Excellent question. I don't know all the answer to this, but I'll try to answer it. So I'll keep coming back to this, but like, what are you going to let go of? And not like, what are the emotional burdens, like, let go of? Sure, that actually could be important, but like, what are the things that you really, from a tactical standpoint, are not interested in doing and don't make you feel good in your day-to-day in your job? Like that would be a wonderful place to start, right? Like what do I really not align with? And then I think the next piece is, and maybe one of the other questions addresses this a little bit, but like I spent a lot of time sitting down and thinking, okay, if I had the perfect job in the perfect scenario, what would it look like? And it's not just about salary or title or like the glamour of an industry or whatever. It's like, what does my commute look like? What are the people that I work with? Like, do we have shared interests? And I like wrote and wrote and wrote pages of, okay, this is like, what's my blue sky? And obviously you can't have it all. It's not all realistic, but going there, like, why not just get it out of your head, like in your wildest imagination, like the law, Einstein and physics, it's like imagination is like a very, very powerful human tool. So why not, at least it might be fun exercise, if anything, to do something like that. Yeah, that's my spiel kind of on the pivot. Is that specific enough? I mean, there are.
Well, whoever raised the question, if you are on the call today and you'd like to add more detail to it, you're more than welcome to come off mute and chime in. You can also message in the chat if you'd like. When I read the question, I looked at it more in terms of someone wondering if this was even possible. And I think that it absolutely is possible. Like if you, especially if you, depending on, the pressure or what the nature of your current job is, if you're in a situation where you don't even have the bandwidth to be able to think about a different situation to put yourself in or a different role that you might hold, yeah, I think that a sabbatical might be what you need to be able to really devote the necessary time to that thought and to, like we were talking about, like to the work, to the really like turning inward, looking at what you actually like as opposed to what you've just kind of gotten used to over the years, and take a look at it that way. And then from there, I moved on to thinking, okay, well, once I know maybe where I want to go, then I can take a look at some of maybe like the more sellable or the more desirable skills for that area and start looking into, upskilling or learning things in that area. Or you could also, depending on, your luxury or whatever your home situation is, you might be in a position to, approach somebody about volunteering with them or, being an unofficial intern or, shadowing them for a day or a week or something. Like there's definitely ways to, you can absolutely career pivot during a sabbatical.
Yeah.
But there's ways that you can go about doing it that don't feel quite so scary of like, well, I'm leaving my coding job and I want to be a lion tamer.
Yeah. That is well said. I think it also for me comes back to, what are your essential questions? And if like, what drives you? And if you're not having those served by your current job, like that should help guide you to what the pivot is. I'd also say that there's some mix of like shame in taking time off, no matter what. There just is a little shame in it, even the way that the second question, like, we have to show that we're proficient to recruiters. We have to prove that we didn't waste our time. I feel like that we should celebrate people who are pivoting and celebrate like the resilience and the anti-fragility of folks who are taking the time off, because it shows courage So I just wanted to call that out.
Thank you for that. I do want to call out, we've got somebody in the chat, Sanja is asking about to-do lists, about how like they've tried different things and nothing has really stuck or worked. I'm putting a comment in here in the chat about how I got over my initial like really like strong opposition to to-do lists by starting to keep a done list. So as I finished a task, I would write it down, and it got me, not only did it get me more of a like a sense of accomplishment, but it wasn't as daunting early in the morning facing, you know, a miles long to-do list. And you also get the benefit of having sort of a tracker that you're building without realizing it, of like how you spent your day. So if I have a particularly, you know, satisfyingly productive day, but I look at the list and it's only got 3 things on it, that's okay, because I will usually know like, oh yeah, they were 3 things, but those were 3 giant tasks and they had a bunch of little things built into them and whatever. But it might be a good gateway, you know, to getting into some sort of more proactive tracking or more proactive list making that, you know, kind of takes the onus out of it at the start.
Yeah, when you're also celebrating, if you're tracking what you accomplished, you're celebrating yourself and the work that you did do, which we probably don't do enough. Which we probably don't do enough. It sounds like, there is a question about sort of to-do lists. And I have a daily top 5. And I don't know if I shared this already. If I do one thing on that top 5, I try to do all of them, but if I do one, then I feel okay. I don't feel guilty if I do one thing. But don't tell my boss that. Just kidding.
We've also got somebody calling out in the chat that like you feel like a failure or you feel like you're not being productive enough. One of the things I do like to call out to people is that like if you're talking to a recruiter and they want to know about, you know, like a gap in your resume and what you did in the interim, it can be really helpful to have not only have like a bullet point list of what you did, but it can be really, it feels better for me at least to approach that question proactively. So it gets asked and my response is usually something along the lines of, oh, okay, I'd love to tell you about blah, blah, blah. If you have a passion for whatever it is you're learning, and hopefully you do because you're pivoting, you know, or at least doing something, you know, so the sabbatical is, the idea of it is that you would then come out with a like closer alignment to what you really want to be doing. If you're doing something and learning things that you're more passionate about and you get to showcase that, that is a really easy way to short circuit, like, okay, but what else did you do? Like if you're only giving and you're minimizing in your response and in your attitude, if you're only giving that answer of, well, I did these 3 things and you just sort of list them off, instead of really talking and having a conversation with somebody about them and about what you learned or about, you know, where you learned it or whatever, it's really easy to feel like you're minimizing your own accomplishments, which is obviously not the goal of an interview or a, you know, a discussion with a recruiter.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. For me, when I started interviewing after taking time off, I, to your point, kind of like led with this, like how lucky, like I feel so lucky that I got to do this, have this break, or, and so instead of it being a shameful thing, it was like, I was excited to talk about it. And it's not like I was excited the whole time.
Yes, very good point. All right, so moving on to our next question here. This person wants to know personally, Julia, how did you spend your year and a half? And what is, in your opinion, the best way to answer questions about a gap in your resume? And this is something we're getting both in terms of sabbatical, but also people that might be furloughed or laid off right now, having to address that gap in their resume. So let's start with the personal and how you spent your year and a half. And I know you've touched on this briefly already.
Yeah, so I quit a job, and then I finished a yoga teacher certification program, which was very like good for the body and soul. And then I went and visited, and I was like very, very lucky to be able to do this. So I know that not everyone has that circumstance, and I really like want to acknowledge that. But I went and I was able to visit like my cousin who just had a baby in North Carolina, and see people that and connect with family and friends that I hadn't been able to do haven't been able to see or connect with because I was quote unquote too busy and like being productive in the throngs of a job. And then I saved a bunch of finances. I know we have a question about that, but I was really lucky enough to be able to get a one-way ticket to New Zealand, and I spent the vast majority of my time off there. And, you know, teaching yoga so that I could pay for my hostel kind of deal. And then I came back to the States and I lived in the Bay Area for 8 years during this sort of tech boom when Facebook started selling ads. And that also was not a place that I was aligned to anymore. So I moved across the country, got rid of a lot of my belongings that I honestly wish I had now. And, and I went to this writer's program. So I had a lot of the self conversation, but I also kind of had like a mantra, and I'm a Philadelphian, true and true. And so our sports team has a slogan, trust the process, kind of cliche, but I really like when I was battling with myself on this time, just like trusting one day at a time that like I would ask for help if I needed to, if I was traveling and didn't know where I was going to stay, or, you know, if I ran out of money, then I could figure out a way to do that, even if it wasn't completely aligned to, you know, I babysat, like that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's important to note that like even if you have a lot of good fortune or privilege or luxury, it doesn't always look like you think it's going to look. So it's important to remember that like it's okay to be having to do some weird stuff to keep the hustle alive. It's okay to be, you know, like walking your friends' dogs even though you're 35. Like that's all right if you're making changes and you're working towards something that's really important to you. There's a lot of things that don't look necessarily like you think they would, but it's okay. It's going to help you get where you want to be.
Or living with your parents if you're lucky enough to do that, which I did, right? And it takes a hit to the sort of performative pride of like where we're all supposed to be right now in our lives. And it's like looking at other people looking at us and judging us, and like it was really, I felt very alone in a lot of it, but it was worth going through.
Yeah. Now I know that from, you know, even just from like a tone or attitude standpoint, the answer about a gap in your resume would be drastically different if you were, like we talked about, if you were laid off, if you were furloughed. I feel like one of the things that we keep hearing from hiring managers right now is that being frank about the fact that you were furloughed, it's not, I know it feels embarrassing. It really shouldn't. You know, this is a situation, it's unprecedented for everybody. We're all going through it together and experiencing it in different ways, depending on where you are in the world, in your life, you know, professionally, anywhere. So that is something I did want to make sure we touched on. But if you are doing this on a personal basis, so like Julia, when you started applying for jobs, what was the, you know, the kind of elevator pitch, if you will, for like how you address that gap in your resume?
Yeah. So definitely, to reiterate what you said, like just like being honest, right? I'm not trying to hide that I had a gap in my resume, because their recruiters, hiring managers are going to see that. And so I'm trying to remember what my elevator pitch was. I had the unique experience of sort of like relocating, which opened some sort of leeway, I think, for hiring managers, and sort of I kind of made it a job to get coffee or tea with people. And that was part of the pitch, is like, I, you know, took some time off, and here's the questions that I'm trying to answer. Remember those sort of like essential questions that are tied to you. And, you know, I just relocated to Philadelphia. But so if you could do it in a way that you're like, you know, being frank about whatever the situation is, being furloughed, being laid off, etc. But here's the questions that I'm trying to answer. I think that your sort of honesty and passion and direction will speak for itself.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it. People tend to challenge you on something that you don't seem very confident about. So if you feel like you're going to get more questions that you don't really want to ask, practice saying your statement.
Yeah.
Say it to your dog, say it to your mirror, say it to the coffee pot, say it, whatever you've got around. But practicing saying something makes it a lot easier to put yourself in a more confident, maybe tone or frame of mind. That's going to help so that you don't feel like you're having to defend yourself or you're, knocked back on your heels during an interview like that.
Yeah, and I think there are things that like I hope that we can normalize. Like I had to take time off to take care of a sick parent. Like that is like the work of life, and we as a society and I'm talking about the American economy specifically, like we don't value that, or maternity or paternity leave or mental health. And so I try to be really open and honest about that because I want to normalize that for my community.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like I'm seeing a comment in the chat right now from Maureen talking about 2 different times in her life when she's had a similar break and had to explain it, and kind of the pushback that she met there. Interviewing is just as much about you interviewing the company as it is about the company interviewing you. So keep your eyes and ears peeled, because if you give an explanation that you think is very, matter of fact, explains what happened, whatever, if you get pushback on that, or if you get like, not necessarily further questioning, but like you can tell when somebody's trying to like make a point with their questions. If that's what you're getting and that's the kind of feeling you're getting from this company, it might not be a good fit for you. Like culturally, that might not be a place where you want to be, because if you have more of an awareness of your mental health and that's something you prioritize and they do not, that can be a very difficult position to be in. And if I know that not everybody has the luxury of being able to turn down a job if you're offered one, but it might be something to consider, because just because they're willing to work with you doesn't mean just because they were willing to have you work there doesn't mean they're going to work with you. It doesn't mean that they're going to be a place that is okay, or that will, help you or be flexible in, other parts of your life if something like this were to happen.
That is very, yes, very well said. And it's sort of like a trope. It's like, don't worry, like you're interviewing them too. But something that like I really try to be in touch with is if something doesn't feel right for you, then it probably isn't right. Like there's a reason that comes up, especially women can be in touch with it really forcefully.
Yeah, good point to make. All right, so this next question, I know we only have 8 minutes left in the chat, guys, so I could do this honestly for like another hour and a half. I feel like this has flown by. So if you have a question that you want to make sure it gets asked, please put it in the chat or please come off mute. So to Julia, how do you prioritize your job or career goals when you know that the ideal job rarely exists? You talked about a lot about like making, writing out and journaling and talking, like thinking to yourself, like what your ideal commute was and people you'd have something in common with and whatever. Once you have that list of things that you want to look for, how do you prioritize that?
Yeah, I don't know that I know, right? I think something that was helpful for me, because I spent a long time in one job with the same group of coworkers, and like really trying to run back the record of like, I'm not stuck. So if I do take a leap and take a job, like I've already done the work of finding this job. I am a capable and resilient person, and I can find another one. So just I'll just say that. But then I honestly, I went by culture for Guru. To find Guru, I had been asking my essential questions, and I was connected to this woman in Philadelphia, and I really like, I don't know if we'll get to this, so I want to say this, like people want to help you. And I only say that because I always want to help people. And so I assume that's the way other people want to show up. So this woman who didn't know me has coffee with me and then starts sending off emails. And so one of those emails resulted in me being connected to Guru. And after I had a conversation with the man who's now my manager, he sent me the Guru culture and values deck. And so I kind of, being a little bit cynical, rolled my eyes and was like, okay, like culture, value, whatever. And then looked at the deck, and the attention to detail and nuance and humor, and I was in a cab in New York or something, I don't know where it was, and looking at it on my phone, and my mouth dropped. And that is what ultimately, the product is really cool. It's close to my house now. That's great. But like it's the people, and we hear that a ton, but like it just felt like the right thing. And that sort of that their presentation of themselves was not like, look how much money we made last year, which I don't even know what that is, but it was like, this is how we are working on showing up, and we are evolving, showing up and treating one another. And that's how I prioritized it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to go about doing it. And it kind of goes to the previous point we made about, kind of the value system of, the American workforce not really being where a lot of people want it to be. These things don't change unless people make waves about it. So if you interview at a company and they are not really, a fit for you culture-wise, there's nothing wrong with dropping an email to whoever interviewed you. Thanks so much, but no thanks. Or these are the kinds of things that raised a flag for me. If they disregard it, fine. But at least you've said your piece. And it's like our HR director is very fond of saying that every drop makes a puddle. So it seems like a small thing, but if you hear that enough from different people, it might help make a turning point or whatever. But it's also like, kind of proving your point of saying, look, this is something that's important to me. I need to prioritize it because no one else is going to take care of my priorities for me. So this is, the value system that I'm judging or I'm evaluating this potential job offer on or whatever, but it gives you a framework to really make better decisions that are more aligned with what you actually want, as opposed to that kind of impulsive, fear-based or worry-based decision-making.
Yes, the fear-based decision-making is really tough, especially if you feel like you need a job and you need it now. And the ideal job rarely does exist. So prioritize, like, the whole list making, make it fun for yourself to make the list of what the priorities are, and go with what feels good.
It can be really helpful. At least when I was doing this still, I thought of it more in terms of like a takeout menu as opposed to a priority list where I had to have a top 5. So I had like a large list. Some things were of better, like more importance than others, and those were in bold. But it helped me to kind of look at the list and then pull out and see like, okay, this is what I want and it applies to this job. But this is also what I don't want and it does apply to this job. Is that, look at the value weight for you. Is the commute something that's going to make or break you because it's how you start and end your day, and so you're going to be miserable on a 2-hour commute every day? Or is a commute something like, maybe you live in a city with public transportation as an option and you could rearrange your commute a little bit, take advantage of the public transportation when things calm down, obviously, but like take advantage of that and use it as a time to take time to yourself, or listen to books on tape or something. You know what I mean? There's ways to look at this and evaluate it to see if something like a commute is really a hugely weighted factor for you, or if it's something that you could make other changes and be okay with a longer commute because the job also gives you these 3 other things that are on your priority list.
There's sort of buckets in there, right? It's like, it's the culture, it's your role. And if your goal is to work with smart, kind humans who respect and recognize you, then it'll help. If you have those goals outlined, it'll help you make those things work. I realize we're
All right, so it is 3:58. We probably have time for one more question, maybe if we want to do it quickly. But before we do that, I just want to say a couple things. Super quick thank you to all of our community members for joining us today. Thanks for taking time out of your day to spend with Power to Fly. We very much appreciate it. And Julia, I want to say a special thank you to you for taking time to spend with us to, tell us about your journey and give us some of the benefit of your experience. So thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. Really am. And Meg posted my LinkedIn in the chat, and I'm happy to chat. Not that I have all the answers, but I would be honored to chat with any of you if you want to drop me a note in LinkedIn. I would be really happy to do that, and happy to be one of the many people from whom you seek counsel.
All right, well, thank you so much for that offer. It's very helpful. I've also thrown another link in the chat here about just a quick reminder of how you can follow Guru if you have any questions about their open roles. I know they have, Julia, there was one we were going to call out that they just posted today. Do you remember what the name of that was?
Yeah, we just posted today, and I can, maybe I can post it in the chat. We are hiring a product manager, a core product manager. And so that should be live on our site soon. So there's just a couple roles, but there's also a place where you can submit like your intent to be interested. So that that's an option too, if there's not a role that seems like you would want to apply for it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question in the chat about other places where you can message. If you have other questions about Power to Fly, you can always email hi@powertofly.com. I usually handle that inbox, so I'm more than happy to field your questions. And let's see. And then, like I said, make sure you follow Guru on Power to Fly. There's a bunch of different options for how you can connect with them there. And I think that brings us to time. So yeah, let's leave it at that, I suppose. Thank you so much, everybody, for spending the afternoon with us. Again, you'll get a rewatch link probably sometime tomorrow at whatever email you use to register for today's session. And you can share that as anywhere you'd like and as often as you'd like.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good Wednesday, and we'll see you here tomorrow.